Georgia transfer quarterback Carson Beck is being linked to the Miami Hurricanes left and right. How good of a fit is Beck?
You are Locked On Canes, your daily podcast on the Miami Hurricanes, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Happy Friday. We made it. I'm Alex Donno, University of Miami alumnus, co-host of Locked On ACC and writer for Canes County at Rivals. And thank you so much to the everydayers for making Locked On Canes your first listen and your first watch today. We're available free wherever you get your podcasts. We're free on YouTube. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. From big upsets to game-winning drives, the NFL playoffs are better with FanDuel. New customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed, win or lose. That's FanDuel.com to get started. Exciting offseason times now that Carson Beck of Georgia is officially in the transfer portal. He opted against going pro, has clearly opted against staying at UGA. He's looking for a new situation. The teams who have been named the three finalists, Miami Hurricanes, Texas Tech, and Ohio State. But it's interesting to note that reporters who cover Texas Tech and Ohio State have come out and said, well, we don't know how interested the schools we cover actually are. So is it maybe Miami versus Miami on this one? We bring in our good pal, Rudy Tomarchio, former Sebastian the Ibis, my former colleague at WVUM at Miami. We're going to talk with Rudy about his preferences on the next defensive coordinator. Miami has made a new hire. Could be to the coaching staff, could be to that player personnel department. We'll talk about it. But let's talk about Carson Beck. So first of all, Rudy, the fact that, the three schools that were thrown out there, people who cover two of those schools seem to be coming out and saying from the Ohio State side and the Texas Tech side, not so sure if we're really going to go all in for Carson Beck, when most of the Miami reporting is, yeah, this is a guy that we have mutual interest with.
Yeah, really interesting story, right? Like, I think when this first kind of the rumors started coming about a few months ago, it was always, wait, are we sure? Is that even possible? Is that a thing? Isn't he going to go to the league? And, the way his season played out and all the connections that are here, I mean, it seems like it's kind of a no-brainer on that point in terms of mutual interest. I mean, look at what happened in that second half of the Pop-Tarts Bowl. I think, look, nobody's Cam Ward. But if you can get an established quarterback who has Power 4 experience, seems like a pretty good deal. And I think you have some other news related to should Miami get Carson Beck that makes it even, even tastier.
Yeah, let me bring that up as well, because Brad Crawford from 24/7 Sports sent this out on Thursday afternoon. If Miami can land Carson Beck, I would expect an elite wide receiver to leave his current situation during the spring portal cycle and link up with the Canes. And by the way, I don't know, just based on the tone of that X post from Crawford, it didn't sound like he was just purely speculating. I think he has a specific receiver in mind who might leave their situation to join Carson Beck at Miami. So hopefully he can attract some extra talent down here, Rudy.
That'd be great. And also, like, imagine that Georgia connection too. I mean, look, Miami's had this established pipeline of now sending talent up to Athens. I mean, you had Lawrence Cager a few years ago. You had Colby Young that didn't really pan out for them this past year. Now Jaden Harris is going over there.
They just took our best defensive back, Jaden Harris, up there.
Our all-pro, first-round Pro Football Focus graded 1,000 safety going up to Athens.
Oh, yeah.
But at the same time, like, look at that quarterback room. I mean, between Emory Williams, if he stays, Luke Nickel that's coming in, playing his high school, state championship game in the Dome in Mercedes-Benz, and possibly Carson Beck. That's a pretty interesting kind of a makeup there in terms of how you could possibly have Luke Nichols sit behind a guy like Carson Beck and all of his experience throwing to, now NFL caliber receivers and Ladd McConkey and Brock Bowers last year at tight end. So I think having a guy that has enough experience, the thing that we were kind of talking about before going on the air, though, that I think is really interesting from the Carson Beck perspective of, is he a good fit culturally for Miami, is, he made some comments during the season that were kind of a little like, they kind of raised some flags for me, more out of like curiosity than really having to like worry about anything. But I don't know if you guys remember this press conference that he spoke about. I forget if it was post game or if it was like during the week, where he said something along the lines of, I don't like watching football. I watch film, but I don't watch football. And I'm wondering, to me, like, every time you hear about Mario Cristobal, when he talks about bringing in players, he talks about, coaches, it's always, we want guys that bleed football, that live football, that ball is like everything to them. And I don't know if those were just kind of comments taken in passing, maybe to say like, look, I watched so much film about this that I don't need to worry about this so much. Or is this something that maybe we'll hear, let's say Carson Beck comes to Miami. Is this kind of like a Jalen Phillips story where he kind of like fell out of love with the sport at UCLA among his injuries as well, and came back to Miami, granted under Manny Diaz and that administration, to say like he kind of like learned to love the game again? I'm wondering if this is kind of a similar story when it comes to that forefront. Either way, I just wanted to bring it up.
No, I remember those comments, and I also remember like the first time Miami was linked to Beck, it was right before Christmas. There was some chatter about it, and people brought that press conference to my attention. But it's like I don't really know what to do with that, because again, like you said, one of the ways you can take that is, if this guy spends 24/7, 365 watching film, maybe he doesn't go out of his way to watch Monday Night Football. I don't know if that's the way to take it, but I mean, it's definitely, because I know that at least this was a big mantra of Alonzo Highsmith, who's obviously no longer working with Miami, but he would always say that the players that we look at have to love football. Like, they were going out of their way to find players with a passion for football. So that's probably a conversation that would come up if and when Carson Beck has a Miami visit. In terms of the on the field stuff, Rudy, of course, tremendous experience, tremendous arm talent. I mean, Carson Beck is going to be an NFL quarterback. I mean, he's got an opportunity like Cam Ward did last year to raise his draft stock, not to compare him to Cam Ward, because if we do that, we're not going to be satisfied with anybody we get. But he does have tremendous arm strength. He's got some athleticism. Sometimes he makes boneheaded decisions, right? But, people were also saying that about Ward last year, because I remember, the Miami haters, when Miami signed Ward, they're like, the guy's a turnover machine. It's going to be terrible there. Enjoy Cam Ward. Yeah, we did enjoy Cam Ward, in fact. Thank you very much. So, yeah, is Carson Beck a perfect quarterback prospect? If he was, he would be off to the NFL right now. There's certain parts of his game he wants to polish, but I think he can do very well here.
Yeah, I think we're really spoiled because for, all the faults of Cam Ward, every quarterback that's out there always has some sort of a fault. I mean, it depends on what their situation is. Are they trying to do too much? Are they in an atmosphere where they feel like they have to do too much? I think the upside of Carson Beck from what we've seen is how he's able to distribute the ball to different receivers. He likes to target his tight ends. He could throw the ball deep. He's got the range where he could throw to everybody. I don't know how much liberty he had with the Georgia offense in terms of changing plays at the line of scrimmage or how he identifies defenses. I think that's something that people really understood that Cam Ward did better than anybody else in college football this past year, and probably something he didn't really get to show off as much at Washington State because he was running for his life when he was there. Look, every quarterback's going to look bad when you don't have an offensive line to protect you. Even Tom Brady, the greatest of all time in the NFL, didn't look good when he had the New York Giants lined up on the other side. He had Justin Tuck and I'm trying to remember Umanura and Matthias Kiwanuka and all these guys like in your face. So, you have a better offensive line coming to Miami for someone like Carson Beck that might show off his skill a little bit more. And granted, he has his personal life already down here. So seems like it's a match made in heaven on that side. So, I feel good about it, mostly because thankfully we did have that tryout in the second half of the Pop-Tarts Bowl to say, okay, we have an idea of what we think the offense is going to look like next season. Is everyone happy with that? I don't know how much more upside there is after a spring practice and a fall practice that you're going to see that much more improvement. So if you could bring in someone like him, hey, all for it, but you're not going to get a Cam Ward every single year. How long did we go, Donno, without, before Cam Ward, that we had a quarterback that we felt really great about consistently for the entire season?
Yeah. No, right. I mean, we had some flashes like De'Aaron King, flash at times. Tyler Van Dyke had a half season in 2021 where he really flashed. Malik Rozier had a really good start to 2017, but Brad Kaya, Stephen Morris, but we hadn't had a guy actually do it for 13 games or 12 and a half games the way Cam Ward did.
Right, exactly. And you look at all those systems, like you could pick a fault out of every single quarterback Miami has ever had. I mean, look, if we had Bruce on this show right now too, I know he's retired. Hopefully we bring you back. I'm going to get you an NIL deal, Bruce, so you can come back and make this, even better. But you go back to like Vinny, go back to Gino Torretta and George Myra in the 60s. There was always something that is a knock on a quarterback. So in terms of what you have currently in the room, can you make it better? Carson Beck absolutely makes it better.
All right, so a couple other things I want to talk about with Beck and the quarterback situation when we come back. If Miami adds Beck, he would not be a full participant in spring football. So what that would look like. Also, is Carson Beck the only option? Could another option maybe become available later tonight? You want to keep it locked right here, my friends. We're only getting started on this brand new episode of Locked On Canes. This is a message from our sponsor, Intuit TurboTax. Are you tired of the endless waiting, wondering, and worrying about your taxes? Well, now that's a thing of the past. You see, taxes don't need to be complicated or stressful. TurboTax is here to change the game by matching you with a TurboTax expert who can work with you on your return right away. No more waiting for answers. No more wondering if you're missing out on deductions. Whether you've got one form or 20, I've got about 20. TurboTax experts give your taxes their undivided attention. When you get real-time updates on their progress, you can focus on what really matters. You won't have to lift a finger, but you'll get the peace of mind knowing that your taxes are being handled by the pros. Ready for stress-free taxes and the most money back guaranteed? Head over to TurboTax.com today and get matched with your expert who's ready to take your taxes off your plate so you can focus on your day. Only available with TurboTax Live full service. Real-time updates only in the iOS mobile app. See guaranteed details at turbotax.com/guarantee. Thank you so much for making this episode of Locked On Canes your first listen and your first watch today. We're available free wherever you get your podcasts. We're free on YouTube. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Make sure you make Locked On ACC your next listen. By the way, Kenton Gibbs and I take you around the conference talking ACC football, ACC hoops, available free like this show wherever you get your pods and available free on YouTube. Rudy, Carson Beck recently underwent UCL surgery on his elbow, also known as Tommy John surgery, but I didn't realize it was done by the same surgeon. Like I knew it was a similar procedure to one that Brock Purdy of the NFL recently had and made a very quick recovery from. I was also notified it was the same surgeon. So the same doctor that gave a very successful surgery to Brock Purdy has given what is hopefully a very successful surgery to Carson Beck. So understanding is he'd be able to start throwing again in spring, but would not be a full participant in spring football. So he wouldn't be taking all the live reps and stuff. So, hopefully, and obviously I would much prefer Miami's next quarterback to be a full go in spring, ideally. But Beck would still have an opportunity to do some throwing, to learn the offense, dive into the playbook, hopefully build some sort of chemistry with his weapons out there. And then in the actual practices and the live rounds, Rudy, we would have an opportunity for guys like Emory Williams and Luke Nickel, who is here for the spring, and Judd Anderson to get some meaningful reps.
Yeah, and I think that's where the questions about that press conference really come in, is saying, can you learn this playbook, understand the air raid principles, go through look, just from that rumor you said about having another receiver, some big time receiver out there in college football, that should this move happen, sounds like he's intended in transferring in the spring as well. Okay, great. That's chemistry that they have to work on together too. And look, I'm sure if I'm oh my God, Carson Beck, you can imagine how many drop passes you had last year at Georgia. You're looking for a new place where guys are going to hold on to the ball for you. So I think that makes perfect sense. It's a matter of that works out well if you have a veteran that's already thrown the ball a million times. I think it's okay to say you could take a rest on that end, but it'll just show you how much of that discipline, how much of that understanding of the playbook and ACC defenses are out there to study up on.
So another thing I'm going to be watching, because if I were Shannon Dawson and Mario Cristobal, I would also be interested to see what happens with Quinn Ewers. Now, we're here on Friday. Later on tonight, you're going to have Texas taking on Ohio State. Ohio State, 5.5-point favorites. They have looked unbeatable lately. Not since that loss to Michigan, Ohio State has looked unbeatable. So yeah, so we'll see what happens with the Longhorns later on tonight. But there's a lot of speculation as to what the future of Quinn Ewers is going to look like because he may very well decide to go pro. His draft grades, he's not gotten a formal draft grade yet, but could be anywhere between, let's say, the first to the third round. Maybe if he doesn't get that first round draft grade, he might make a similar decision to what Carson Beck just made, what Cam Ward made last year, to play one more year of college to try to raise your draft stock. If he does play another year of college, I don't think Texas would welcome him back because of the Arch Manning situation. They want Arch to play and start next year. So, yeah, I mean, I would also be paying very close attention to Quinn Ewers. And if he does get eliminated tonight, you would be, a few days closer to hearing his decision. So I wonder if that could be another option that might become available to Miami, in addition to Carson Beck, who's also a very good option.
Yeah, you mentioned that too. His deadline would be like January 24th or something like that if he got eliminated, tonight.
Yeah, and I think that would be, if he gets to the finals, it would be January 24th. If he gets eliminated tonight, I would imagine it would be probably 5 days from now. So so about around the 15th, I would think.
That's interesting. I mean, look, when Joe Burrow was at LSU and he had like that Cajun spelling where he did the thing, could you imagine the Quinn Ewers nameplate on the back? Because it writes itself in terms of making that happen. Again, if you want to nitpick between like Carson Beck and Quinn Ewers, they each have their criticisms. Like there's times where Quinn Ewers go, why aren't they put in Arch Manning yet? And then he has like a fourth quarter like he does in the college football playoff, and you go, oh, that's the Quinn Ewers I've been waiting to see all year long. So there's guys like that across the board. Either way, both are an improvement on our current quarterback room. I think I'd be happy with either. I'm not going to, beggars can't be choosers at this point. We need improvement at quarterback. I don't think we need to have the best guy between the two because, I mean, look, let's look at just how this year played out. Miami got the absolute best quarterback in Cam Ward. They also had a shot at getting Will Howard. And Will Howard went to Ohio State where there's a more complete team around. So he may not have, he didn't outshine any of the other quarterbacks that we've spoken about in terms of what his abilities are. Look, he had some major criticisms too, because in that loss to Oregon, he took that slide late in the game, didn't have the clock management that's there. He's throwing to one of the best receivers in the country in Jeremiah Smith, and Egbuka is another great receiver. They're going to be playing for a chance at the national championship. So I think you don't need to grab the number one guy, but if you could fill out your team with the complementary talent to make it work, that's all we need.
By the way, when you saw that Brad Crawford X post that we talked about earlier, if Miami can land Carson Beck, I'd expect an elite wide receiver to leave his current situation during the spring portal cycle and link up with the Canes. I don't think it's going to be him, but I think any Miami fan, when you read that, your thought was, please God, let it be Jeremiah Smith. If there's any, I don't think it's going to be him, but man, that's the first name that crossed all of our minds, right?
If you have a player in either Scarlet or Crimson, that's an elite wide receiver that wants to come down. I'm looking at Ryan Williams from Alabama because Jalen Milroe's quarterback situation is still kind of like on the iffy side too. So to me, I'm wondering, look, those two were competing for attention all year, but when Alabama started struggling and losing games, you didn't really hear much about Ryan Williams anymore, and you started hearing more about Jeremiah Smith. So they're both capable of doing amazing plays. Hey, remember, Ryan Williams is the guy that had that amazing play against Georgia and Carson Beck to beat them earlier in the season. He did superhuman things as a true freshman as well. So I'll use the exact same analogy I use between Quinn Ewers and Carson Beck to talk about both Jeremiah Smith and Ryan Williams. You may not get the best guy, but if they fit your team and you have other parts to make it work, I'm not going to complain and saying, well, we missed out on Jeremiah again. We all want to see him ball out tonight as much as we don't like Ohio State. He's a great kid. I'd be very happy with someone like Ryan Williams if that's the other receiver they're alluding to.
Well, and let's talk about the weapons who are already here. Elijah Lofton, his role it can only increase. He showed some good stuff this year as a true freshman. I would like to see Elijah Lofton used a little bit like Tyler Warren is used by Penn State, a Swiss Army knife, maybe Mr. Everything on Miami's offense. Use him creatively because Elijah Lofton can do so many different things. Josiah Trader, who showed us a lot in the bowl game. I think he's ready to step up. Of course, Jeremiah Smith's former high school teammate. I think JoJo Trader is ready to really have a big year this year. I'm looking forward to seeing what, we didn't see much this season of Nye Carr and Chance Robinson. I'm looking forward to seeing them as well, and hoping Nathaniel Ray Joseph can, find more PT and more consistency.
And adding CJ Daniels from LSU as well.
Yeah. Right.
The one thing that I was, upset about when Isaiah Horton left to go to Alabama was to have an opportunity for Miami to have two larger wide receivers, taller, explosive guys. I think that's something that's been missing for a long time. So if you bring in someone like a Ryan Williams, who's extremely explosive, and add him into an offense, look, we can nitpick offense all day. I think they have the tools to make this work. It may not look the same as last year, but if you can get Jordan Lyle and Mark Fletcher enough carries together to, take some pressure off of whatever defensive hodgepodge we have, and I know we're going to talk about that later too, you've got the receivers to make this work. You saw some great things from JoJo Trader in that bowl game. I think Elijah Lofton, I like what they did with him last year by having him a lot kind of like the old H-back, like out of the backfield kind of stuff to warm him up and then also work him along the line. That's something you saw a lot that Mario Cristobal did when he was here as an assistant coach, because he was a tight ends coach at one point in time. He worked with guys like Greg Olson and Kevin Everett, and I'm trying to remember who else he had, like I think DeLeon Farr. But either way, Greg Olson was the main highlight of that group. And you watch the way that they used him, they snuck him around everywhere. They could put him out in the slot. They'd have him on the end. They'd do delays. They'd, circle him around. They always had different, versatility for him to make him a weapon, a safety valve, a primary option. And again, if we want to go back to Carson Beck, that's something he's used to already, because he had Brock Bowers, who was his Xavier Restrepo for a couple of years there. So I think that fits really, really well. And I would love to have that personnel group together for sure.
I would love it. All right, let's talk about the defensive side of the football. Plus, Miami has added a new staffer who could very likely be part of that player personnel department. Hurricanes seem to be bolstering that area, and I think that's a very good thing. You want to keep it locked right here, my friends. We're not done yet on this brand new episode of Locked On Canes. We've been having a blast on FanDuel. Folks, from big upsets to game-winning drives, the NFL playoffs are better with FanDuel. Because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. The FanDuel app gives you everything you need for live bets, same-game parlays, and so much more. I cannot wait to get the NFL postseason action kicked off. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. Get started with $200 in bonus bets. I love the player props. You can bet on the over-unders, the game totals, who's going to score a touchdown. There's so much there. FanDuel.com. Make this playoff season unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Thank you for making Locked On Canes your first listen and your first watch today. By the way, if you want to become a Locked On Canes insider, get text messages directly from my phone to yours. Keep you updated on breaking news, show updates, question and answers. Click the link in the show description below. Try it free for 14 days. Then if you like it, you can opt in for $4.99 a month. Give you a lot of added value on there in the Locked On Canes insiders chat. We got our guy Rudy Tomarchio with us. So Rudy, let's start with defensive coordinator. I wish I could speculate more on who it's going to be, but loose lips sink ships, and there are no leaks aboard the USS Cristobal. He is keeping everything that's going on in his DC search, is keeping it very close to the vest. There was earlier this week, Kane Sport reported that maybe there's some traction for Anthony Campanile, who's former linebackers coach with the Dolphins, current linebackers coach with the Packers. Other than that, there's been a lot of speculation on who it might be offered and who hasn't been offered, who's interviewed, who's not interviewed. But I mean, do you have any preference, on any names you would like to see in consideration for the new defensive coordinator, and B, what sort of profile and philosophies would you like that next defensive coordinator to fit?
Well, loose lips sink ships. Do you think they have a McDonald's employee in like Altoona, Pennsylvania, who knows about Miami's defensive coordinator search or anything like that? Because there's no snitches around. There's only one place we got snitches. It's a McDonald's. Or maybe the McDonald's across the street from campus. In terms of like defensive coordinator preferences, Really, I'm looking more about what the system should look like, and also having the ability to really evaluate talent, because I think that's where the downfall was of the previous administration on defense, is that I think there was just a few misses in terms of how the talent's going to work together, and maybe just having too complicated of a system to work in this new realm of college football, when you have this inconsistency of your roster every single year, where you bring in, younger players who are inexperienced, who are coming out of high school, and also some players from the transfer portal, and also your ability to possibly lose players to the transfer portal every single year. I don't think you're going to see as sophisticated of a defensive formation in terms of like blitz packages and switching. I think you're going to see a lot of basic base defenses. So if you're looking at like Campanelli, for example, out of the Dolphins, Miami has success of bringing Miami Dolphins linebacker coaches to the defensive coordinator position. Randy Shannon did that many years ago for Miami. And that was a guy that played two high safeties throughout his entire tenure as defensive coordinator. I think he's still doing it to this day because it's proven and it works. So in terms of names, I'd be really happy to have somebody that has some connection back to Miami and understanding, South Florida. You don't necessarily have that bringing in a guy from the Dolphins. I mean, if I remember correctly, didn't Campanelli interview for this job a couple of years ago already? He lost it to Lance Guidry.
Yeah, that was my understanding, that he was, I think he interviewed, but at the very least, he was a person of interest. So he's been tied to this job before.
Yeah, I'm okay with that, especially when you look at like the breakdown of like what position groups they have experience in and where are their possible holes. I think, with Jason Taylor still being on with the defensive line, Lance Guidry was a former safety himself. So, that issue with the secondary is definitely a bigger problem on that side. So having somebody that maybe has more of that, defensive backfield experience in terms of like knowing linebacker play, secondary play. In college football, you're not really running as many linebackers as you used to. So like if you look at the old Randy Shannon 4-3 defense, you're not running three linebackers anymore. You're running nickel for the most part because of how they spread it out with 5 wide receivers nowadays. I would be really happy to see somebody, with a different position group experience. Like I know Clint Hurt was a name that people were throwing around a lot. He's been great in the NFL, a former Miami, player himself, another former defensive tackle. So it's something that you have a different position group. In terms of how those personalities work out together, I would probably rather see another defensive like line position coach come in and have the coordinator position be someone with experience in a different group. When Bruce was still doing the show, he mentioned, a lot of the older guys want Randy Shannon back. I know that there's politics behind that. I wouldn't be mad at that, just given the relationship that he already has with the current staff and South Florida. I mean, the thing I think that people forget is that Randy Shannon was a linebackers coach with the Dolphins at the time Jason Taylor was still playing. So I think there's some chemistry that's there. And I think it's also just going back to that whole idea of playing a base defense that's not super exotic, that's not really complicated, because you need players who have closing speed, who could do the basics like setting the edge and clean tackling, and also man-to-man coverage. I think that's something that Miami used to be known for, and that, would really bail them out of situations, because if you could lock down your wide receivers, it gives time for your defensive line, your pass rush to get there. You don't have to blitz so often because your defense is doing well. And it's also taking time off the clock because that offense has to, move the ball a little bit. You're not giving up as many big plays. So I'm not looking for like a home run hire per se, in terms of like having a guy that was a big name head coach, like a Ed Orgeron, for example. I'd love to have him back. Defensive line history as well. Guy that knows defense. I'm pretty sure he's not doing that anymore anyway. He's enjoying his life as it is.
Yeah, it's funny because Ed is always around. Both of his sons work on the staff, and he lives down here. Like he's always around. But I don't know. I feel like Ed is still enjoying his vacation with all that money that LSU had to buy him out with.
Exactly.
I don't know if he wants to do it again full time. I mean, if he's interested, I'd be down.
Exactly. And in terms of having like another personality like that, like, I don't know. For me, I'm happy with having somebody that's just ready to go nose to the grindstone and figure out what you need personnel wise. If that's Campanelli, great. If that's a shock turn like Randy Shannon, if you need to get a couple members of the board of trustees to kind of put their egos aside, and hey, if there's one guy that can make that happen, it's Joe Echeverria. He comes from that business background where they have to put their differences aside for the better of the team. If that's the case, fine by me. If he's got the support behind the scenes, I'm happy to take that.
So in other staff news, Miami is expected to hire, and kudos to Gabby Urrutia at Inside the U for reporting this. Hawaii general manager, that's the Hawaii Warriors GM. I'm so sorry, I'm going to butcher your name, sir. Keiki Missapeka is expected to be hired to the program. He's not going to be the GM at Miami, just so people know, but he's the Hawaii GM. He's expected to take a role on the Miami staff. I don't know the specifications of that role. I could definitely see him joining that player personnel department that Taylor Edwards recently joined. I love the fact that Miami is building up that front office just to try to turn your player scouting department into something that kind of resembles what they do in the pros in the NFL. And a lot of colleges are moving in that direction. So prior to his time at Hawaii, Missapeka served as an NFL international scout for the Player Pathway Program, was responsible for scouting the Pacific region, including American Samoa, Tonga, Fiji, Australia, and New Zealand. And I know for Cristobal, and of course, keep in mind, Miami just lost Joe Salavea over to Arizona to become their defensive line coach. And I know for Mario, very wisely, and I'm sure he learned this in his time in the Pac-12, you need to have that pipeline open to the Pacific Islands because so many incredible players and incredible human beings come out of that part of the world.
Absolutely, especially in the trenches. You're looking at offensive and defensive
Yeah.
linemen. I mean, look, if you want to look at CC Maui Noah, for an example, at Miami, there has always been a Samoan connection to football. You see a lot in the Pacific on the West Coast of the United States. I mean, Joe Salavea is an alum of Arizona. He played there when Cristobal was at Oregon. Like, this is something that, look at BYU and how their connection is through that as well. When that departure was announced yesterday, that was my first question. I wonder what Coach Cristobal is going to do, what that personnel looks like in recruiting for the next couple of years, because you don't have that Samoan connection directly, because sometimes you need a member of your family or of the Samoan family to really bring in talent into your program. So smart move by Coach Cristobal, because I think if go back into Miami history, even though Miami has not had a huge history in terms of recruiting Pacific Islander, American Samoa, Fiji, Tonga, outside of Dwayne Johnson has a little bit of that DNA. What you do have is a history of having really diverse rosters in terms of different cultural backgrounds between, Latin players, African-American players, Bahamian, from different parts of the Caribbean. Look at the offensive line that Miami had in 2001 that was called the United Nations offensive line, because he had Shirko Haji Razuli, whose family is from Iran and South Florida, Martin Bibla, who was from Canada, Brett Romberg from Pennsylvania, Joaquin Gonzalez from Miami at Columbus, Bryant McKinney. You have these different nuclei of players, this nucleus that Miami comes through. And that's really where, Miami originally had its success. They were the first ones to integrate back in the day. They were the first ones to bring in recruit the inner city. So I think this is a really smart move from Mario Cristobal, because you need that diversity of culture, but you also need that diversity of talent, and you go anywhere and everywhere to find it. That Australia pipeline that started a few years ago, not just with Lou Headley, but across college football with Pro Kick Australia, that is something that you're not going to see go away. It's only going to expand. So to do that, and to go back to your earlier note about the front office being built up, how many of these recruiting services are out there right now that sometimes you just get it wrong? You have five-star quarterbacks who go to, 4 or 5 different stops in college football. I think enough, if we want to go back to Miami historian too, from our days as a student, I think that was also part of what the criticism behind Larry Coker that's come out of that administration, not him directly, but there was a lot of reliance on these recruiting services to go after guys all over the country and say, well, this is a 5-star from here, this is a 5-star from there. But they didn't have that overall culture and talent background in terms of having all of those 5 stars pan out, where you could take your chance on a 3-star, 4-star South Florida kid who plays against 5-star talent every single day. And maybe their development window is a little later in their maturity. Look at a guy like OJ Frederick from Miami, who was supposed to be a 3-star defensive back, and he was our lockdown corner. Not saying that because the secondary had its struggles. He legit was the best cornerback on the field for Miami. Cam Ward had 0 stars coming out of high school.
I was about to say just that. You beat me to it. Cam Ward, basically unrecruited out of high school, and nobody was covering him, running a wing T offense. He was a 0-star recruit.
Yeah. And Josh Allen, for example, out of his side too, there's at least one of those guys every few years that comes out. So Miami used to that was their bread and butter, was finding that talent and evaluating and going, okay, well, we don't care what the services say. I know our fans are probably not going to be like up in arms and excited about this guy, but we think this guy is going to be the one. So yeah, I love that.
1000%. And you bring up a great point, because as much value, like for me as a fan and as a media guy, yeah, I spend a lot of time listening to the opinions of, Rivals 24/7, on 3, etc. But, you can't rely on that as a football coach. You're preparing to fail. Like I'm sure NFL teams don't base their draft boards on what Mel Kiper has to say, or at least you shouldn't. That would be
unless you're the Jets, and then you just go on Madden.
Yeah. That's right.
I'm cool with that. Like, if I was 17, I would love to be the GM of a team and to say, cool, whatever Aaron Rodgers wants, whatever Madden says, I'm good with.
Yeah, no doubt. Well, we appreciate your time as always. Rudy Tomarchio, follow him there on X at Rudy Tomarchio. Follow us at Locked On Canes. Make sure you smash that like button and subscribe. If there's any breaking news this weekend, we'll be there for you. We've had a lot of 2-episode days this week with all this stuff going on, so you know how that goes. We will talk to you guys again next time on another episode of Locked On Canes, part of the awesome Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.